But it is interesting to me that a man who's so concerned about patriotism is out there trying to raise money for the army of another country, a country which is prosecuting a genocide as we speak.
Why is a former British Army colonel who led the UK's forces in Afghanistan and was an intelligence chief under Tony Blair now raising money for the Israeli army?
I'll certainly be watching and thinking of you and praying for your victory, which I've no doubt will happen. Thank you very much.
Joining me to discuss this is someone that also served for the British Army in Afghanistan, Joe Glenton, who is now a journalist and author. Joe, welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
So Joe, Richard Kemp, his social media puts him in Gaza over the summer, various posts. What do we know about why he was in Gaza and what he was doing there?
Well, Richard Kemp has a pretty long-standing relationship with the State of Israel. Over many, many years, he famously was the one who declared it the most moral army in the world.
I don't believe any army in the world has superior morality to the IDF. In many cases, I believe the IDF's morality exceeds those of most other armies.
Exactly how that relationship developed and exactly how long it's been going on is a little opaque, but clearly, whether it's an ideological thing or he's getting some other kind of benefit out of this, he is profoundly and vocally committed to kind of running PR for the Israeli regime and has been for a number of years now.
So we've got these videos which we can have a quick look at.
You will have heard a lot of propaganda about violent attacks in and around the GHF sites here. It's all lies generated by Hamas.
Kemp has always had this slightly buffoonish air. He's at this aid point, he's doing a piece to camera. There are crowds of hungry people behind him, obviously, and he's claiming that a lot of the claims of violence and the claims about the aid are lies of Hamas and their apologists in the West. And then there's a rip of machine gun fire in the background. I think it really captures it.
International and national media.
And you've got to put it in context. He's in this kind of fortified aid post. And the people in it have been shooting at, we've seen a lot of evidence of them shooting at locals, hungry people.
It's been doing remarkable work, and it's been extremely well received by the civilian population in Gaza. I must have spoken to at least 50 Gazan civilians collecting aid at each of the 2 distribution sites I visited. They were extremely grateful for what they're being given, and many of them said it's the first time they've received free aid since the war began. And I heard chants like, "I love America, I love Trump."
And he's made it quite a lot of people being, "Oh, I love Trump, I love the West," and stuff like that. But if I'm honest, if the only way to get food, if I'm a hungry Gazan and the only way to get food is to approach and beg for food from these heavily armed aid checkpoints whose weapons are trained on me and have been used, then I would probably say I love Donald Trump as well. So I would take it with a pinch of salt.
You know, he's been on the airwaves over here. He's been on podcasts over there. He was on GB News recently.
Hugely exaggerated cases of hunger and starvation and famine even in Gaza, which I don't think is anything close to the truth. But that's the current narrative that's going on. And the extent to which there is hunger is brought about not by Israel, but by Hamas.
And one of the world's leading sort of famine and hunger watchdogs has now said that Gaza is in famine. Kemp goes around saying that this is all nonsense.
The writing's on the wall. An important agency, a series of important agencies have declared that this is a famine, as we all suspected. And the fact that Kemp is still going out there and kind of pushing the Israeli line, which we know has been debunked, like so much of what Israel says about what's going on in Gaza, is really shameful, to be honest. And I do wonder how he's unusual among former senior military officers in that he's so ideologically attached to this. I suspect that the kind of more archetypal British military officers, even the ones on the speaking circuit, many of them would look at this as quite damaging to the brand of the military. That there's this one guy, an outlier, or a handful of guys, there's very few of them, out there pushing what is obviously propaganda that has been clearly disproved. To the degree it can be, obviously reporters aren't allowed into Gaza, but there are aid organisations on the ground. And I think it's pretty shameful that he's still pushing this. And it makes you think, it makes you wonder what his motivations are.
I mean, you called him buffoonish, but it's quite sickening what he's doing, really. And Israel's been sending various sort of influences over to the GHF sites to say, oh, there's no famine here. And we couldn't find any direct links between Kemp and the GHF, I mean, I don't think he's there in any official capacity on behalf of them, but he does have deep ties in Israel. And what do we know about the sort of organisations that he's involved in over there?
So we know he's involved. He's on the board, as it were, of the UK version of the AWIS. It kind of frames itself as a sort of an Israeli version of the British Legion or Help for Heroes. And you can go and find them on the Charity Commission, where it currently appears they're under investigation, and look at some of the services they're alleged to provide, which will be like it'll be things like recreational materials, snacks, and stuff like that, given out to the troops. It also says that they're involved in looking after troops when they come back injured or whatever, stuff like that. You'll find there's some quite shadowy funding, and the BBC recently got in trouble for putting him on air, speaking on behalf of that organisation, without declaring what the links that organisation has to the regime in Israel.
Yeah, because they're linked to the Israeli Ministry of Defence, obviously the IDF. But, I mean, the UK arm of it would be people just sending money in.
Yeah.
I think we saw on their website that they put on things like concerts for the troops.
Exactly, yeah.
I think they even got criticised because they had a swimming pool in Gaza for the soldiers. You know, at a time where water shortages, drinkable water anyway.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, stuff like this.
Yeah, it's that kind of stuff, yeah. And it's not just a Help for Heroes, and it's not just a Royal British Legion, it's something quite different. And again, as it stands, if you look at the Charity Commission website, there appears to be some kind of warning attached to that website, and there appears to be some kind of investigation underway as we speak by the Charity Commission.
And Kemp himself said he's been in Israel pretty much permanently since the October 7th. We know that he's had dealings there going back a lot further. We'll talk about them in a minute. And we've got this kind of list that we generated of different visits and, you know, public speaking events that he's done. You know, here, for instance, December 21st, 2023, the British invasion, an evening with Douglas Murray and Richard Kemp, sounds lovely, at the Carlton Hotel in Tel Aviv. Also just with various government ministries, the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. And he also poses for photos with IDF soldiers. It seems that he's pretty well sort of integrated there.
He certainly, I've watched his arc for a few years now, because he obviously talks about Afghanistan, Iraq, and terrorist and counter-terrorism stuff in this country as well. But part of his story arc, if you like, is deeply connected with Israel, and it's not completely clear when that started, but he is clearly loved by Israelis because he, you know, pushes apologia for what they're doing in Gaza and the West Bank, and a lot of their policies.
They don't deserve to be condemned and blamed for the deaths of Palestinian civilians from Gaza, which has deliberately been caused by Hamas.
The fact he was a colonel, he's in the British military, gives him a certain legitimacy, but you'll often see those kind of accounts cite his quote from quite a few years ago now about the IDF being the most moral army in the world. What he says is often used to kind of support the Israeli line or stuff like that, because it's this idea that he's an outsider who's come in and is locked into what's going on, and he's bringing a kind of expertise as a colonel, as someone who worked with Cobra, as someone who worked with the higher levels of counter-terrorism in government under Blair and Brown, and he's given them a certain legitimacy. So you can see why. What's harder to figure out is whether he is just a useful idiot, or whether or to what degree he's on the payroll.
Kemp himself is clearly an ideologue, and has this strong affinity to Israel. Where do you think this came from? What do you think the origins of his kind of politics are? What about a bit of background? Well, let's start from the beginning with Mr. Kemp.
He is an interesting character, and I've watched his kind of career arc. He left the military in 2006, and he had a storied career before that. His kind of publicly available stuff about his career says he served in the north of Ireland 8 times. And it has to be a question about whether his sense of affiliation to what the Balfour Agreement, or people around that time called the little Ulster in the desert, is connected to his experience fighting Republicans in the north of Ireland. And I wonder how much that's part of his composition. As I understand it, he's probably unique among relatively senior officers. I think he joined the ranks originally, and then was commissioned, and went through his whole career as in the.
So he started off at the bottom.
Started off at the bottom, but then was commissioned. He served with the Royal Anglians, which would be my local regiment, up in East Anglia, and all the way through until he started getting these kind of plum jobs. He worked for the intelligence section, supporting the Brown and Blair government, counter-terrorism stuff. I understand he also briefed COBRA, the Cabinet Office Briefing Room, which is the thing that's obviously called every time there's a crisis. When he's introduced, it often leads with the fact, among other things, that he was the commander of British forces in Afghanistan in 2003, which appears to be true, though it was for 5 months, and it was a period of an extremely quiet operational tempo. In 2003, obviously, most of the focus was on Iraq. So it's also interesting that he's developed a kind of brand, and I suspect that is partly what the Israelis have seen, this brand and a particular kinds of experience in particular areas of counter-terrorism in the military would be very appealing to the Israeli state.
I mean, he's certainly a creature of post-9/11 sort of politics and ideology when it comes to counter-terrorism and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And an interesting point in one of the podcasts we listened to was when he talks about how the Israeli intelligence were brought in to train the British military. You know, they kind of said, we've got years of experience dealing with Islamic extremism.
Definitely. Israel looked at 9/11 as a chance to kind of sell its wares, which we know Israel does. It tests equipment and it tests methods, and then it tries to market them around the world. We know about that connection. But certainly the wake of 9/11, my reading of it is that Israel were like, we know how to do this. We've been dealing with this for years, kind of thing. So it doesn't surprise me that there was an exchange. There would have been an exchange of ideas that Israel and Britain and the US would have been interested in talking about the technologies of occupation fundamentally. And we can see how they would be seen as useful in the context of Iraq and Afghanistan. So yeah, you can see why that happened. Exactly at what point in that Kemp kind of adopted the kind of ethno-nationalist ideology of Israel, I don't know. I don't know if he was involved in exchanges. He is definitely a product, even though he joined the army in 1977, but he almost came of age in the sense that we see him now in the wake of 9/11 and those wars, and that's what he's very much built his brand on.
And Joe, you never served at the same time as him in Afghanistan, but you have had some small dealings with him.
But yeah, and occasionally we've never met, but we've never kind of had a Twitter spat. Though he's very vocal on Twitter, so I'm kind of surprised that never happened. But certainly I've had a pop at him once or twice, and he's had a pop back. But via the media, the intelligent medium of sharing my articles. So thank you, Richard, for that.
Should we get the quote up?
Yeah, let's get it.
So in response to one of your articles, so you said it's a joke article by a hard left army deserter, Joe Glenton.
I can't really argue with that, to be honest. It doesn't bother me. It's interesting though that the article he's talking about was a Guardian piece, and because it's back in the news, it was about when Tommy Robinson randomly bumped into a bunch of army recruits in uniform, and he seemed to be quite popular with them, and had some pictures taken with him, and obviously it caused a massive PR disaster. But I think the thrust of the argument was that the military in some sense is a far-right organisation, and we have to understand its history and what it does, and the way it's an institution about conducting violence, colonial violence, violence which is often predicated on race and territory and colonialism and empire, even to this day. So all of that, I think I'm pretty clearly still correct. But it's interesting. I wonder if he would reflect similarly now when he stood in the middle of Gaza, surrounded by starving people, with rips of machine gun fire going in the background while he's trying to kind of splurge the Israeli line down the barrel of a camera. I suspect there wouldn't be that much self-reflection. I think he's a man who's very committed to that cause.
Joe, thanks very much. A lot of what Richard Kemp is doing is quite opaque, so we're going to keep watching him. But I think we've given the audience a good introduction to who this man is. Thanks very much for watching. We're trying to get to 3,000 regular donors for Declassified UK. We've got loads of support and donation throughout August. Let's keep it going in September. Thanks for watching. Click the subscribe button, and we'll see you at the next video.